Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The River is Home, a novel, by Patrick D. Smith. Narrated by Jim Seybert. Forward. One day in early 1951, my father, who was 21 at the time, rolled a sheet of paper into his typewriter and started writing. A gentle breeze was blowing through the cypress trees as Abner Corey sat on the stoop of his shack mending fish traps. He finished one page, then set it aside. A few weeks later he looked at that sheet and decided he wanted to find out if he could write a novel. 10 days later, The River is Home was finished. He showed it to his professor and friend at Ole Miss, who surprised him by telling him he needed to get it published. Not knowing how to do that, and having the boldness of youth, he researched publishers and chose Little, Brown and Company, thinking it was a small operation and more likely to take a chance on a first novel. He then packaged up his manuscript and sent it along with a note. "My name is Patrick Smith, and this is my novel, The River is Home. Please publish it immediately." Lo and behold, they did just that. He became the youngest published author in Mississippi at that time. He chose as his locale for his coming-of-age story the lower Pearl River in Mississippi. It is set at the beginning of the 18th century, and the dialogue is written in the vernacular of that time and place. It revolves around 13-year-old Skeeter Corey, who knows and loves the swamp. He can skin a deer, row a skiff upstream, and pop the head off a snake with his bare hands. He can throw his knife and split a playing card from 100 feet, a skill he never intended to use on a man. The Coreys are good people, though illiterate due to lack of opportunity. Growing weary of life as sharecroppers, they move to the swamps of the river, where they eke out a meager living by fishing and selling their catch to the townspeople, who disparagingly call them river rats, yet enjoy the fruits of their dangerous labor. It's a hard yet happy life on the river, but outside forces seem determined to collide with their way of life. The result leads to tragedy and a reckoning for Skeeter. You only have to hear the first few pages to see why that professor encouraged Dad, feeling that people would be drawn to this story set on the banks of a southern river. Through his words, he takes you to that time and place. Each character is so well developed that you feel you have met them somewhere, sometime. Through his descriptions of the plants, weather, smells, and moods of the river, you will be there, swatting away skeeters, watching the shadows play under a big cypress tree as the murky water laps against your canoe, nervously watching for gators, all the while inhaling the sweet yet fetid smell of the swamp around you. I found them so vivid that I asked him once how he knew all of that. He said that he just observed and remembered what he saw as a boy, camping and playing along the strong river, which runs through his tiny hometown of DeLow, Mississippi. He wrote this before I was born. I remember reading The River is Home when I was about 8 years old and being impressed not only with the story, but also proud that my dad was the author. It still impresses me to this day. I invite you to join the Corey family in a world not so long ago or far away. Patrick D. Smith, Jr. Fall, 2020. 1. A gentle breeze was blowing through the cypress trees as Abner Corey sat on the stoop of his shack, mending fish traps. There had been a light rain that morning, and now the sun was sending long shafts of light into the swamp to draw the water up again. The drops of rain, clinging to the cypress boughs, glittered like thousands of diamonds in the air. The cries of wood ducks and cranes mingled with the chatter of squirrels and the incessant bellowing of frogs for more rain. Everything was full of activity, but the Corey family. Abner's wife Glessa was stretched out on the back stoop, basking in the sun. The two boys, Jeff and Skeeter, were throwing knives into the bare plank floor, while Teresa, the only daughter, was helping Abner mend the fish traps. The traps were the most valuable possessions of the Coreys because they represented their only means of getting cash money. The Coreys had been living in the swamp for 5 years now. They had previously been sharecroppers, wandering to and from different parts of Mississippi and Louisiana year after year, getting what jobs they could and eating when they could, but always being without much of either. And then Abner had brought them to the Pearl River swamps of lower Mississippi to begin a new and strange life. They arrived with nothing, and had to build their small shack with their bare hands. Abner had chosen a little clearing on the bayou several hundred yards from the muddy Pearl. The clearing was bounded by tall, moss-covered cypress trees, mingled with magnolia and willow. From their clearing to the river lay long stretches of flat marsh grass, and behind the clearing was the almost impenetrable swamp. The swamp was joined by long rolling hills covered with pine and scrub oak, but the only way to cross from the clearing to the hills was by boat through the murky swamp. 5 miles down the river was a little settlement called Milltown, and 20 miles to the north was Fort Henry. Once a week, Abner and the boys would row to Milltown and trade fish for money and supplies, and once a year they would go to Fort Henry to sell their winter trappings of hides. Fort Henry was a bustling port town on the steamboat route to Jackson, far to the north. Abner had promised the family if they ever got enough money he would take them on the steamboat to Jackson. But that time never seemed to come. Most of the Coreys' time was spent on the river and in the swamp, Abner and the boys fishing, hunting, and trapping, while Glessa and the girl did the house chores and tended the small garden on the edge of the clearing. They grew a few onions, peas, and peppers, but their main diet usually consisted of fish, game, and the wild poke salad that grew along the clearing. They were planning this year to have pork, because Abner had traded for 3 hogs in Milltown and had built a pen on the banks of the bayou. The Corey shack was built of drift lumber and cypress logs. The house had 3 rooms and no windows, and the roof was made of hand-hewn cypress shingles stuffed with moss. 2 rooms of the house were used for sleeping, and the other for cooking and eating. There were 2 beds in one room and one in the other. The beds were made of cypress slats, and the mattresses were made of croaker sacks sewn together and stuffed with moss. Ma and Pa Corey slept in one room, and the boys and Teresa in the other. The kitchen contained a bare plank table, a washstand, and a clay hearth in one corner for cooking. All the water for cooking and drinking came from the bayou. The Coreys used the banks of the bayou for their privy and bath. The oldest of the children was Jeff, who was 19. Teresa was 15, and Skeeter 13. The Coreys had named their youngest boy Skeeter because he was born prematurely, and Pa Corey said that he was no bigger than a good-sized mosquito. Even now he was small and runty for his age, and did not have all that he should have had in the way of book learning. Jeff was tall and skinny, with short-cut blonde hair. Teresa was the most unusual of the Corey children. She was like a rose growing in a field of cabbage. She was an unusually beautiful girl, with long, flaming red hair, brown eyes, and a complexion as white as snow. It was strange that such a child could have the same blood as the haggard pair that had borne her. Ma Corey was a fat, sloppy-looking woman with straggly gray hair. Her teeth were stained brown from the long years of snuff-dipping, and her skin was wrinkled and tanned from the long hours of working the fields before they came to the swamp to live. Pa Corey was built much the same as Jeff, tall and skinny, with short-cropped gray hair. Ma had always said that he could make more money hiring out as a scarecrow than he could any other way. Pa Corey would not go into the swamp with Jeff and Skeeter to set and run their animal traps. He was more afraid of snakes and alligators than he was of the devil himself. In the spring and summer, Jeff and Skeeter would go into the swamp to kill snakes and catch young gators so they could sell the snake skins and young gators in Milltown. In the winter, they would trap for mink and otter. Pa Corey was a fearless man on the river and bayou, but nothing could induce him into the swamp. The boys had built a flat-bottomed skiff to use in the swamp and a rowboat for the river. As Pa Corey sat mending the traps, he often talked to himself, as he was doing now. "Dern gars," he said. "Don't make nothing but trouble fer me. Wish the slimy devils would stay out in my nets and traps. Just like hanging a bull-gator by the tail. I wish the good Lord would have a big fish fry in heaven, and use all the gars they is in the river. Pesky devils." "Pa," said Teresa, "why is it that the gars won't stay in the traps like the catfish and the buffalo do?" "Well, it seems that the Lord equipped the muddy bastards with saws on their heads, just so's they could saw their way out of anything. I've heard they could cut clear through a cypress log, just as easy as nothing. I caught one on a trot line once, and even the niggers wouldn't at him. They said he were a brother to the devil, and if you ate him, you would sure go below once you was dead." "Pa, Skeeter told me once that he saw the devil up in the swamp one time. He said hit was just afore dark, and he came through a gap in the saw vines, and there the devil sat chewing on a big old water moccasin. He said when the devil seed him there, he swallered the snake whole and run off through the swamp, belching smoke and bellowing like a bull. Do you reckon hit was so, Pa?" "Now don't you pay no mind to what Skeeter says, you hear? He's liable to come home one day saying he'd seed 2 bull-gators doing a dance in the top of a cypress tree." "Just the same, Pa," Teresa said, "it sure would scare me if I was to see something like that. That darn Skeeter just ain't scared of nothing, and I once seed him catch a live snake with his hands and pop its head clear off its body. What makes you so scared of snakes, Pa?" "Now you shet up and go tell them 2 boys to come here and help me get these traps in the boat. If we don't get 'em out soon, it's going to be too dark. And I just got a feeling that them big old catfish is going to be on a party tonight." Teresa jumped up and ran to the room where Jeff and Skeeter were throwing their knives and said, "Pa said for you, too, to get them traps in the boat so you can get them out before it gets dark. You know, Pa don't like to be on the river at night with them steamboat fellers running over everything that gets in the way." "Who's afraid of 'em?" Jeff said. "Skeeter, throw your knife through her big old toes." Skeeter rose, drew back the blade, and before Teresa could run, the knife went slicing through the air and buried itself in the floor between her toes. "Oh, my gosh, Pa!" wailed Teresa. "Skeeter is in here trying to split my feet in half with his knife." The boys jumped up and followed Teresa to the porch where Pa was sitting. Jeff said, "Darn fool, you ain't got no cause to go around the house bellowing like that. I've seed Skeeter shave the whiskers off a tick's face at 10 feet with that knife. You know darn well he don't never miss what he aims at." "Yeah, but they's always a first time for everything," said Teresa. "So just you don't be doing that no more. You dad-burned kids would make a hog's jaw bust carrying on the way you do, said Pa. Now get them traps on out there in the boat and let's get going. Teresa, you tell your ma to get up off that floor and hoe the garden like I told her to. And you better help her, too. Pa and the boys loaded the traps in the boat and shoved off down the bayou toward the river. They had about 2 miles to row before they got to the place where they were to set the traps. They did not put them in the river where it was deep, but set them in little coves and branches running into the river. They set their trot line in the river and ran it along logs or sunk it deep into the water by putting heavy iron weights on the line. Pa was in the rear of the boat, and the boys sat in the middle and rowed. They passed through the area of flat marsh grass and into the dense vegetation of the river bank. The entrance of the bayou into the river was so thick with cypress and magnolias that a person not familiar with it could pass right by without knowing it. Pa said that was a good thing, because it would keep the river folks and the sporting men from Fort Henry from messing around their place. The water, where the bayou met the river, looked like a pot of boiling mud. The Coreys could never remember the river when it wasn't muddy, but the bayou was always clear. Pa believed the big gar fighting on the river bottom kept the mud stirred up all the time. When they reached the river, Jeff and Skeeter had to put all the strength they had into rowing the boat upstream. The river was always swift. Even in the summer, when there was not much rain and the water was low, it was full of trick currents and whirlpools. They had once seen a big log go down in the middle of the river and shoot high into the air 100 yards from where it went under. Sometimes the channels would change overnight, and the steamboats would run aground and have to be pulled out of the mud. About a mile above the Corey Bayou, the river made a big turn and cut to the west for a few miles. This was known as West Cut. Along the turn there were several coves and creeks running into the river. When they reached the turn, they cut into an almost hidden cove along the west bank. This cove was Pa Corey's favorite place for placing his fish traps. The big cats and buffalo would come into the cove at night to feed on the smaller fish and swim into his cone-shaped traps. He had caught as much as 200 pounds of fish in one night there. After they had carefully laid the traps and tied the trap lines to stobs, they cut back into the river to see about their trot line. When they came to the line, the boys headed the boat downstream so Pa could work it from the back of the boat. The hooks were baited with big chunks of squirrel and rabbit meat, and Pa had several piles of the cut meat in the boat to bait the hooks that were empty. About halfway down the line, he jumped up and started shouting wildly, "Go, darn sons of bitches! Why can't the dirty devils leave a fellow make a living in peace?" "What's the matter, Pa?" asked Jeff. "Matter?" cried Pa. "Look at this. A dern catfish head without no body. That cat would have weighed at least 20 pounds. It's the dad-nab turtles did it. If it ain't them thieving devils, it's the blame gar tearing up the traps and nets. There ought to be some way to outdo these critters." "I knows a old nigger down in Milltown that could fix it so the gar and the turtle wouldn't mess around with no fish lines," said Skeeter. "He done learned to mix up some potion you can rub on the lines that makes them critters turn their tails and run. Let's see what he can do next week, Pa." "We'll sure have to do something, Skeeter," said Pa, "or it won't be worthwhile to even fish in this muddy old river." "Pa," said Jeff, "it's going to be dark soon, and it's just about time for that steamboat to come around the bend. You better hurry up, or we all liable to be swimming home instead of riding in this here boat." "You mighty right," said Skeeter. "You sure better get done with them lines, Pa, before that steamboat fella gets here." Pa Corey finished baiting the last hook, and they turned the bow of the boat downstream towards home. The last rays of light were fading through the tall cypress trees when they reached the mouth of the bayou that led to their home. About halfway through the marsh flats, they heard a loud blast and saw fire and smoke belch above the treetops. "Just listen to that feller sound off," said Pa. "You would think the idiot owns the river the way he tries to blow the tops off all the trees." The steamboat men did not like the people who lived along the banks of the river and in the swamps. They felt that the families, like the Coreys, who made their living along the river, were always getting in their way and slowing down their speed. Sometimes the boatmen would purposefully go close to the bank and run through trot lines just to get rid of them. And when they caught the swampmen on the river with their small boats, they would try to sink them with their wake. Once, below Milltown, a swamp man had shot a deckhand on a boat when they passed and tried to sink him, and the people in Milltown had lynched the man without giving him a trial. The townspeople and the men on the river boats called the Coreys and their kind swamp rats, and they said they were no better than the vultures living along the river banks. There was no law to protect the swamp rats, so they preferred to stay to themselves and avoid trouble as much as possible. By the time the Coreys had put the few cats they had caught into the fish box and secured it in the bayou, Ma Corey was calling them to supper. Jeff took a bucket from the rear of the house, went to the bayou to bring in water for washing the dishes, and Pa and Skeeter went in search of wood to keep the fire going through the night. The fire at night was their only protection against the mosquitoes, which were especially bad in the spring of the year. It was dark by the time all three got back to the house, and as they climbed the steep steps to the kitchen, they could smell the aroma of frying fish and boiling coffee. Teresa was setting the table with their only setting of tin dishes, and Ma was bending over the mud hearth getting the pan ready to fry the corn pone. The Coreys, in the last 5 years, had eaten tons of fried fish and corn pone, which was their regular supper most every night. "Gol darn it, Ma," Pa said. "I sure wish we hadn't had to build this blame shack so high off the ground. It nearly breaks my poor tired bones to climb the steps every day." "You just better thank the good Lord we did build the shack high off the ground instead of fussing about it," said Ma. "You know darn well what will happen when the rains come, and that muddy old river comes messing round trying to get in the house with us." "I reckon you're right, Ma, but it sure do tire a poor old fool like me climbing them steps all the time." Pa and the boys took the bar of yellow soap off the cabinet top and began washing the river slime from their hands before supper. Each took his turn at the one cloth towel that hung on a nail over the washstand. When they had finished, they sat at the table, and Teresa poured hot coffee into the tin cups before them. "Ain't no more sugar for the coffee, Pa," said Teresa. "You better get some the next time you's in Milltown." "Yeah," said Ma, "and if'n you don't get some more cornmeal, they ain't going to be no more pone on the table afore long. If'n you boys would stay out in that swamp long enough to clear me a little patch of land, I could grow us some corn to eat and feed them poor old hogs. Them hogs are getting so thin it's a wonder the snakes ain't done at 'em afore now." "Now, they ain't no use to worry none," said Pa. "Me and the boys are going into town Saturday, and we'll get some sugar and meal, if'n them dern turtles and gar will just leave us be long enough to haul in a mess of fish." "You gonna take me to town this time, Pa?" asked Teresa. "You been promising to take me for quite a spell now. Please take me this time, Pa." "Now, you know why I ain't took you to town, Teresa," he said. "I done told you 1,000 times that if'n them dern town boys was to ever see you, they'd come sniffing round here and just cause us a heap of trouble." "Well, that ain't no reason why you can't ever take me," said Ma. "You know darn well ain't even no old hound dog gonna come sniffing round after me." Ma Cory finished the frying of the bread and dumped it onto a plate and set it with the fish on the table. They all gathered at the table, and Skeeter slapped a fork into a big piece of the fried catfish. "Now, just a minute, Skeeter," said Pa. "I think I better turn up some thanks tonight afore we eat this meal." Pa turned his head toward the roof, and the others bent their heads. "Good Lord," he said, "thank ye for this meal. And please, Lord, keep them dern turtles and gar away from the lines afore Saturday so's we can have some more pone on the table next week. Thank ye. Amen. Damn critters," he murmured to himself as he carved a big piece from the pone before him. "Pa," said Jeff, "me and Skeeter was thinking about going into the swamp tonight after we eat and gigging us some frogs. I heard one bellowing last night what sounded like he was as big as a bear. Sure would be good to have some frog legs to eat in the morning. You boys had ought to stay out of that swamp in the night time. You know the good Lord didn't make that place for us human beings to go into. One of these nights, you going to go into that place and ain't going to come out at all. There ain't nothing in there that could hurt a feller if'n he jest keeps his eyes open and don't act a fool," said Jeff. "Anyhows, we ain't scared of hit like you air." When they finished the meal, Teresa put the dishes on the stand and began heating some water to clean the grease left on them by the fish. Ma put a big dip of snuff in her bottom lip and got the sage straw broom to sweep the floor. Pa ambled out to the front porch to sit and think about ways to get more traps set. And Jeff and Skeeter got out their frog gigs to sharpen the points on the old wet rock that the family had had for as long as they could remember. "Jeff," said Skeeter, "if'n we see a big moccasin in the swamp tonight, I'll show you how to catch the varmint. Maybe we can swap him for some liquor sticks when we go to town Saturday." "You better quit messing with them snakes so much without any help," said Jeff. "One of them varmints is going to knock a hole clear through you one of these days." "Shucks," said Skeeter. "You know I ain't scared of them snakes. I was in the swamp one day by myself and seed a big otter stalking one of them buggers. I saw it real still in the skiff and watched what was going to happen. That darn otter snuck up to that snake backwards and waved his tail at him. When the old snake struck at that bugger's tail, that otter turned so quick and sunk his teeth behind that snake's head I hardly saw it happen. I asked the old otter to tell me how he done it. That sapsucker showed me all about it. I'll show you how it's done first time I gets a chance." "One of these days you're going to turn into a gar for telling them big tales like you do," said Jeff. "Sometimes you scare me when you start talking like what you do." "I ain't telling no tale, honest, Jeff," said Skeeter. "You can see sights such as I do if'n you just goes about it the right way." "If'n I ever see some of the buggers you do while I'm in that swamp alone, they ain't even going to be no swamp left where I come tearing my way out of there. Now, you better shet up such talk, and go get us a good leadard knot so's we can get going." Skeeter took a burning stick from the hearth and went to the back of the clearing where they stacked the wood to get a fat pine knot to use as a torch. When he got back, he was slapping his neck and howling with pain. "We better get some of that oil I got and rub on us afore we leave," he said. "Them skeeters is sure out to kill a feller tonight."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?